Hi everybody. Today's class was on the largest cities in world history, and there's several points I hope you got across today. First of all, history doesn't have to be spoken or read in a book. Data, scatter plots, graphs can also tell a story about history. Second of all, cities are the engines of civilization, and where you see cities located, it shows hegemony or dominance or certainly influence, and cities are very important in our study of history. And my earlier point of graphs being able to tell a story, if you look at this particular graph of where the largest cities in history were located, you can see Asia in purple has had the highest number. And then you see some of the places in the world like South America and North America didn't get into the mix until fairly recently. And again, Afro-Eurasia, this big portion of land that connects Africa, Europe, and Asia, had the most established networks, the most time to establish themselves, and that explains some of it. If you look at the location of cities from Europe and Asia, you can see this disconnect that happened in 1900, and then we see the rise again of Asia so throughout time. So graphs and data can tell a story about history. So if we look at the world in the year 100, we can see the 10 largest cities in the world following a very similar latitude line. Now geographically it was nice, first of all. The climate was good, but more than that, the Silk Road, the network that connected China to Italy, a series of networks of roads, really facilitated the rise of cities and exchanges, and this was the impetus for a lot of change in history along the Silk Road. Now I'm going to fast forward in time 400 years to the year 500, and we can see the remnants of the Silk Road and the influence of the Silk Road, but we also see a rise of cities in the Middle East. Also, if we look around the Mediterranean Sea, you can see that this was an important part of the story, culturally and economically. Also, China, containing 3 of the world's largest cities, is showing that China was doing pretty well during this time in the year 500. If I fast forward another 400 years to 900, we do see some similarities to 500. Again, China around the Mediterranean, but we see a couple new players in the mix. India, Japan, and certainly in the Middle East. Now, a few centuries prior, Islam became a dominant religion in this region and facilitated a lot of growth. So these little red dots can tell a story that we're going to learn in more detail as we move forward throughout the year. If I fast forward 100 years, the world of 1000, again, it's following this very similar latitude line. And we are seeing, Spain is new to the story. We have some Southeast Asian influence. But again, noticing the Western Hemisphere, although there were people there, don't get me wrong, they weren't in numbers, and they weren't numbers enough to facilitate cities. In the year 1200, you can see the importance of being along the coast. People gravitated to the coast for a lot of reasons. Travel, you can live off the sea pretty well. Trade, certainly. So people who were able to position themselves along the coast had an advantage over perhaps some inland cities that didn't reach the growth of these cities. 1500, 8 years after Columbus, we can see a real Asian hegemony with 2 of the biggest cities in India and 4 in China. Again, we have North Africa still, and we have France. But again, nothing we see in the Western Hemisphere at this point. Now, you're going to see Columbus's arrival in North America, not America. He never set foot in the modern United States of America. But this event facilitated significant changes as we look through time. If I fast forward 100 years to 1600, Japan having 2 cities that are the largest in the world. China remains, Asia, France, and Paris, and Rome, and North Africa. 1800, right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we see England, we see France, again we see Rome, and we see Asia still having significant power. Now, this is a very pronounced difference, and you can ask yourself, the effect of the Industrial Revolution on the world, if I go 100 years later, we can see a clear shift of hegemony to Europe and the United States and Russia as well. So 9 of the 10 countries are either Russian, European, or American, with 2 in England, 1 in France, 1 in Germany. And we see the Industrial Revolution and the age of exploration has yielded, a lot of imperial might from the European nations. But the world will change in a fairly short amount of time. If I only fast forward 50 years, you can see Argentina, South America is in the mix. We can see Russia still. So at this point we have a world that is spreading out. We have a world that is becoming slowly more global. Now 50 years later, with the advent of the internet, clearly a global world with North America, South America, Africa, and Asia having some of the largest cities in the world. Notice Europe has lost that hegemony that was there just in 100 years ago. So throughout time, as events happen and as changes happen, we see cities representing these changes. And the most modern data we have in 2015, a few years ago, we can see a truly global world. But we also see what in economics they call the Asian tigers, ready to really flex their economic muscle here. And we see Africa again. So to reiterate the point, telling a historical story does not have to be necessarily spoken or written. You can use data, you can use graphs, you can use scatter plots, you can use numbers to tell the story. Big point number 2, cities are the engines of civilization. The 7 criterion that we were using in this class to constitute civilization: advanced religion, advanced tools, government, laws, writing, social classes. Cities is at the top of that list. You cannot be considered civilized without cities.